Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Family Law Talk. Family Law Talk. Presented by Kirk Stange of Stange Law Firm, P.C. Stange Law Firm is a multi-state family law firm. Now, here's your host, Kirk Stange.
Welcome to Family Law Talk. We have an interesting topic today. The topic is why have a revocable trust? And this is based on an article on our blog, familylawheadquarters.com, dated August 26, 2023, and the title of that article is What's the Advantage of a Revocable Trust? So as a follow-up to the episode today, go on over to familylawheadquarters.com and read more on this topic. But let's go ahead and jump on in. Look, most individuals understand the importance of having a will. When that day arises where they pass and they leave this planet, they understand that their assets need to be passed on to their heirs, and particularly, too, if they have kids, they want to designate who would be the custodians of their kids, particularly if the kids are still minors, and how those assets would pass to their kids and their loved ones. And so, most individuals, when they go down this path, they think about a simple will. Right, I need to have a will drawn up. The will designate how my assets are going to be divided up. And specific assets could also go to specific people. So it could be set up where somebody has a will and it's kind of split by percentage, so much percentage to one individual and then another individual. But it can get as grainy and granular as designating specific assets like specific collectibles or certain household items going to specific people. Okay, the thing is when there's a will, after somebody passes, this will has to be submitted to the probate court. And then what the probate court has to do is assess the viability of the will. So out of the gate, they've got to say, does this will meet the legal requirements? And that entails, various requirements. And the laws vary by state, but normally the will's got to be signed. It's got to be signed in front of some witnesses. Typically, there's, notary seals on it, right? It's a true and accurate copy of this will, and the probate court determines that. And then from there, the process can get more cumbersome than most people think. And candidly, it can get more cumbersome based on really the size of the estate. So the larger the estate, the more red tape, the more oversight there can be. Some estates, if it's a smaller estate, it can happen a little bit quicker, right? But there's still this red tape that has to be overseen by the probate court. Again, they've got to determine that the will is valid, that all the requirements have been met. Typically, notice has to be published to a legal periodical. That way, creditors who have claims can make their claims if they feel like they were owed money from the decedent. Taxes ultimately have to get paid. And really what the probate court, in just a big picture sense, has to do is make sure that the will is carried out in the way the decedent intended for it to be carried out, right? So they've got to supervise this in most instances. Well, look, versus having a will, what a lot of individuals need to think long and hard about is having a revocable trust instead, okay? A revocable trust can do very similar things to a simple will, but the beautiful thing is it takes this process out of the probate court. So when an individual has a revocable trust, they still have a will, but it's called a pour-over will. And what ends up happening is all the assets pour over into the revocable trust, and then this is managed outside of the red tape, the oversight of the probate court, okay? So in a lot of instances, right, it's going to be less attorney fees in terms of managing and administering the estate in the probate court, which, just to give you a sort of a metaphor, it'd be like having a calculus teacher checking your homework. Seriously, the probate court will look at this long and hard, and that's okay because they're trying to make sure things are done right. But again, it can just slow the time in which the assets go to the beneficiaries, and there can be more attorney fees and sort of submitting all this stuff to the probate court. And sometimes probate courts, when you get into settlements and annual statements, can reject these. and want things redone. So by having a revocable trust, the beautiful thing is these assets go into that revocable trust with the use of a pour-over will, and then what you have is a trustee who manages the estate of the revocable trust within the terms of the revocable trust versus having a personal representative do this in probate court, right? So for most individuals, avoiding probate is a good thing. Less fees, heirs get the assets quicker, less court oversight, just a much better sort of cleaner process. So for most individuals, if you're thinking about having, simple will done, consider having a revocable trust done. Now, we could really go far down the path for individuals who have large estates, who are worth significant amounts of money, let's say millions of dollars, let's say. I mean, some of these individuals need more than a revocable trust. They might need some varieties of irrevocable trust, which is really a topic for another day. But for individuals with a modest amount of assets, a small amount of assets, look, it still makes sense to have that pour-over will with the revocable trust in most instances. Now, look, anybody contemplating this, thinking about this, obviously talk to a lawyer who's competent and licensed to practice in your state. Go through this with them. Maybe there's intricacies and differences which would maybe obviate the need of a revocable trust. But for most individuals, having a revocable trust just makes sense. It simplifies this process, and it gets the assets out of probate court. But there's another important key for individuals who have revocable trust, which is this concept called funding the trust. Okay? So assets that are in the revocable trust, when the decedent passes, those then ultimately are administered through the revocable trust. But for a lot of assets, to get them in the revocable trust, what needs to happen is the assets need to be ultimately retitled, and the funding of the trust needs to take place. So let me just give you some specific examples. And again, any attorney who's licensed and competent to practice this area of law in your jurisdiction can go through this with any of the listeners who are listening to this podcast here today. But certain assets that ordinarily it just makes sense to retitle in the trust might be real estate, could be vehicles, bank accounts, investment accounts. In terms of life insurance, the revocable trust might become the beneficiary of the life insurance policy. Could be collectibles, and it could be other assets. And again, with the liquid kind of assets like bank accounts, investment accounts, and life insurance accounts, what often happens is the revocable trust becomes the beneficiary. And in some instances, we call this, and again, this is going to vary by state and the particular type of asset, but look, it's called payable on death. Oftentimes, attorneys and others in the financial industry use the acronym POD, or it could be transfer on death, which is referred to as TOD. So POD or TOD, so these assets POD or TOD into the revocable trust. And then when they're in their revocable trust, these assets are part of that revocable trust. And again, they're administered outside the probate court, which is what most individuals, when they really contemplate and think about it, that's what they would want for their beneficiaries. Most individuals don't want their beneficiaries having to deal with an arduous process in the probate court when it could easily be avoided for, simply by having the pour-over will with the revocable trust versus just having a simple will and no trust, okay? Now, some individuals in hearing all this say, well, what's the downside of having a revocable trust? There's got to be a downside. There's got to be, some piece to it that individuals might not like. Well, look, to the extent there's a downside, the truth is an estate plan with a revocable trust is ordinarily going to cost more on the front end than somebody who goes to a lawyer and just says, I want a simple will, right? It's going to cost some more money. And again, the difference in the amount of money is going to vary based on the lawyer in terms of what the lawyer charges. But, all things being equal, maybe it does cost a little bit more on the front end to have the revocable trust versus just a simple will. But on the back end, the reality is for most, is that the beneficiaries are going to end up saving money on the back end because they're not going to have to burn a lot of the estate's value in attorney fees and then dealing with the probate court. Okay, in terms of downsides, another potential downside might be this, which is, look, some individuals forget after they have a revocable trust to fund it, right? So I just talked about titling these assets in the revocable trust or making the liquid assets POD or TOD into the revocable trust. A downside for some might be they get that revocable trust and they don't fund it. They just forget to do it or they don't do it. And if that happens, then the reality is that the revocable trust ends up being created for nothing, basically, because it wasn't funded. So it's really important, listeners, if you have a revocable trust, talk with your lawyer about how to fund that revocable trust to ensure that the point in having that revocable trust in the first place actually takes place, okay? Here's another good piece I would tell you in terms of having a revocable trust that a lot of individuals ought to think about and contemplate. Look, for individuals who have minor kids, young kids, let's say, and let's say, in our firm we do lots of divorce law, custody cases as well. So let's say an individual is a single parent and they have these assets and their kids are minors. Look, if something happens to them by having a revocable trust, and most of them, it can denote the age at which the kids would get the assets outright, and then prior to that age, a trustee would be appointed who would then manage the assets for the kids, right? I mean, most individuals obviously, don't, if we're talking significant money, want all their money, let's say, going to an 18-year-old. They might want to wait until their children are 21 or 24 or some other responsible age where the trustee can manage these assets to make sure that it's preserved. Okay, that's another big advantage of having a revocable trust, is ensuring that, hey, single parents, you don't have to worry. You appoint, a friend, you appoint another family member, to manage these assets until the children reach a responsible age. Okay, that can be a great point in having a revocable trust versus just having a simple will. All right, well, that's the topic today. Why have a revocable trust? I think I gave you most of the attributes of a revocable trust. I gave you a couple of the potential downsides. Maybe some other lawyers could come up with other pros and other cons to having a revocable trust, but in my mind, these are the important ones. So I hope you found this topic interesting today. As a follow-up to the episode, go on over to familylawheadquarters.com. Read the article titled, What's the Advantage of a Revocable Trust? It's dated August 26, 2023. I think a very interesting topic. And to the single parents out there, the single parents who have kids, I think this topic is really important in terms of why to have a revocable trust. All right? Well, thanks for tuning in. Stay tuned to our next episode coming up on Family Law Talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to Family Law Talk with Kirk Stange. Visit StangeLawFirm.com for more about today's topic or to put Stange Law Firm to work for your family today. The choice of a lawyer is an important decision and should not be based solely on advertisements. Neither the Supreme Court of Missouri or Illinois reviews or approves certifying organizations or specialist designations. The information you obtained in this podcast is not, nor is it intended to be, legal advice. You should consult an attorney for advice regarding your individual situation. We invite you to contact us and welcome your calls, letters, and electronic mail. Contacting us does not create an attorney-client relationship. Please do not send any confidential information to us until such time as an attorney-client relationship has been established. Past results afford no guarantee of future results, and every case is different and must be judged on its own merits. Kirk Stange is responsible for the content. Headquarters, Office 120 South Central Avenue, Suite 450, Clayton, Missouri 63105. Kirk Stange is licensed in Missouri, Illinois, and Kansas.
The holidays start here at Baker's with a variety of options to celebrate traditions old and new. You could do a classic herb-roasted turkey or spice it up and make turkey tacos. Serve up a go-to shrimp cocktail or use Simple Truth wild-caught shrimp for your first Cajun risotto. Make creamy mac and cheese or a spinach artichoke fondue from our selection of Murray's cheese. No matter how you shop, Baker's has all the freshest ingredients to embrace all your holiday traditions. Baker's, fresh for everyone.
We know her as Crooked Hillary. But to Nikki Haley, Hillary Clinton is her personal role model, the reason she ran for office. Here's Nikki in her own words.
I often say that the reason I got into politics was because of Hillary Clinton.
Hillary Clinton is actually the reason, that I made the jump.
So Haley raised taxes like Hillary, backs open borders and unlimited work visas like Hillary, did favors for Chinese companies like Hillary. Now the globalist Wall Street bankers who financed Hillary's campaigns are funding Haley's campaign. No wonder the liberal CEO of Wall Street's biggest bank says,
"If you're a very liberal Democrat, I urge you, help Nikki Haley too."
And just like Hillary Clinton, Nikki Haley shouldn't be president because she's wrong for America. Learn more at therealnikki.com. Paid for by Fight Right Inc., not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee. Fight Right Inc. is responsible for the content of this ad. Fight-right.org.